If I told you to think about the best JDM car from the 90s, most of you could produce an answer pretty fast. But what if I told you that I have a car here today that you most likely didn't think about and some of you might not even know about? This right here is a 1990 R32 GTS-T sedan. Now, I know that some of you are going to say this is just a watered down GTR, but in all reality, that's actually what makes it so good. In the early 90s, racing was dominated by the R32 GTR. We've all seen pictures and heard stories about the legendary blue Calsonic GTRs that racked up multiple championships. They're obviously extremely popular nowadays, but they were just as popular back in the early 90s. This meant that it quickly became a dream car for the public and car enthusiasts alike. But unfortunately, the R32 GTR wasn't exactly affordable or practical, even by standards in the early 90s. With that being the case, that meant that Nissan needed to find a way to market a vehicle that was more affordable and more practical, but still carried some of that heritage that the R32 GTR created. And that's where the R32 GTS-T sedan comes in. Let's start with the power plant of the GTS-T, because as we all know, the R32 GTR comes with the legendary RB26. Now the RB26 is a twin turbo straight six engine that's a 2.6 liter. This car right here comes stock with an RB20 that has a single turbo and is a 2 liter straight six. Obviously you can see that this one is far from stock. It has a top mount big turbo and is tuned on a Haltech. However, the ceiling for an RB20 is still very low compared to an RB26. The RB26 with a tune and a turbo upgrade can make upwards of 500 to 600 horsepower with just those. And if you do a full build, they make well over 1,000 horsepower. I believe the highest horsepower RB20 is around 800 horsepower. And this one right here is built to handle about 4 to 420 wheel. And it's currently making 350 horsepower. Now, of course, this engine wasn't meant to be able to compete with the RB26 and the R32 GTR because that wouldn't make sense. Like I said, it's meant to give you shades of GTR performance, and I believe it does just that. It has a respectable amount of power stock to be able to get out of its own way, and with a slight build, you can at least meet or exceed stock GTR numbers, which I think is more than a lot of people can ask for. And you still get that legendary RB sound with a straight six turbo. Now let's talk about practicality, because I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that this is the most practical car, especially by today's terms. But I will say it's more practical than the R32 GTR. So I think it's another thing that Nissan got right. Now, of course, anyone taller than 5'10" probably isn't gonna wanna sit back here because my legroom is next to nothing. And obviously this one has a harness bar, so it makes me feel like I'm sitting in a roller coaster at Cedar Point. But at the end of the day, a back seat is a back seat, and that's practicality. Finally, if there's gonna be a car that gives you the feeling of driving something like an R32 GTR, then it needs to drive like a GTR. Thankfully, when I was in Japan, I had some good friends that let me drive their R32 GTRs. And the biggest difference that I actually forgot to mention earlier is that the R32 GTS-T is rear wheel drive, whereas the R32 GTR is all-wheel drive. It's one of the main things it's known for. Now, obviously that means there's a huge difference in relation to traction and performance, but that also means that the GTS-T is a lot lighter than the GTR because you don't have the entire front portion of the drivetrain, which means that the GTS-T steering is much lighter and the car feels a lot more flickier than an R32 GTR does. When I talk to people about the GTS-T, I actually tend to explain it like it's Nissan's Miata. And I do that because the GTS-T, for one, is a lightweight platform just like the Miata. It's rear wheel drive and it's relatively cost effective and makes just enough power to have fun with, but not necessarily break the law. Now, obviously there are huge differences between that and the Miata, but the core basis of the car, it's pretty similar, which was what makes it so fun. And when you consider that you get those positive qualities with some of the styling and some of the technology of an R32 GTR, I mean, how do you beat that? And earlier, like I said, the noise. Oh my God, guys, take a listen to this. Oh my God. This thing sounds absolutely mental, and obviously, like I said earlier, this one is far from stock. A lot of that noise you're hearing is the fact that it has a 3-inch exhaust all the way back to a hollowed out muffler, and it actually has an external dump pipe off the turbo, so you get that really loud screaming noise when it's on full boost. and this thing sounds absolutely wicked. It pulls like no other. And like I said, modified, this one makes 350 wheel horsepower, which is much more than a stock R32 GTR makes. So when you take everything into account of what the R32 GTS-T has to offer, it's a somewhat affordable version of the R32 platform. And because the platform is identical to the R32 GTR, if you spend a little bit of money, you can put a lot of the GTR styling pieces on the GTS-T and get some of the original looks from the GTR. And obviously the big lacking piece would be the engine and the fact that it's rear-wheel drive. And for a lot of people, that's actually a plus because the rear-wheel drive gives them the opportunity to use it as a drift platform without any extra work. And a lot of people do just prefer rear-wheel drive cars like myself. And obviously you're not gonna get a ton of power out of the RB20, but with some money dumped into it, you can match or exceed stock GTR numbers. At the end of the day, you can't put a price on a dream car, but that doesn't mean that a budget suddenly disappears. So if an R32 GTR is your dream car, but you don't have the money to buy a GTR, then the R32 GTS-T is the perfect platform to get you into an R chassis. And when you put a little bit of money into it, you can get some of that GTR styling and really start to chase that GTR heritage that Nissan created. That's why I consider this Nissan's economy JDM legend, because they give you hints of the GTR heritage and performance, but in a nice economical package that in theory was supposed to be affordable. Unfortunately, that's not really the case nowadays. But hey, just like I said earlier, you can't put a price on a dream car.